Adam Taxin here in Skokie, Illinois, just north of Chicago, a big Jewish area. And I am here with Rabbi Louis Lazovsky of, give me the full name of the shul again. I always forget it because it's so long, two titles.
Beis HaMedrash Hagadol Kesser Maariv Anshe Luknik.
Yeah, and I have some connection with Illinois. I know it's not one of the swing states that I'm traveling through in the 48 period, but good luck getting to Wisconsin, Ohio, and Iowa without spending some time in Illinois, which I'm doing right now. And I know Skokie a little bit. I have some connection with Illinois, and not just my ex-wife. But I happen to like this shul a lot. And I probably more often than not I'm at Chabad shuls, but I spend some time at non-Chabad shuls. I'm not a Chabad Lubavitcher, but I just tend to go to those shuls a lot. And what I really like about Rabbi Lazovsky is he does not beat around the bush. He's one of the couple of rabbis around the country. You too, Rabbi Yazagli, you too, Rabbi Sarabrowski in New Jersey, who really doesn't beat around the bush when it comes to politics. And this is obviously Inauguration week. And, well, it's an interesting week in the Torah because we just finished Genesis last week. And I'll get to you in 10 seconds. And we start Exodus. And a little ominously, for those of us who like Trump, one of the first lines that will be read from the Torah during the Trump presidency is, there arose a Pharaoh who knew not Joseph, which is not a good thing for an incoming leader to be associated with. But anyhow, I present Rabbi Lazovsky. Thanks for talking to me today on Facebook Live.
Good morning. Thanks for having me. It's good to see you again after so many months. I think this Seder of Shmos is one of a transition.
One thing I could say, can we just use, there's a lot of non-Jews or not observant Jews who might not know a lot of the Jewish terms in here,
Sure.
So if we can use them if possible.
Sure. Yeah, again, one thing about the Torah portion of Exodus, the first Torah portion of the second book of the Old Testament, is that a new king arose, a new Pharaoh arose that didn't know Joseph, didn't know his good works, didn't know his good deeds, and decided to enslave the Jewish people. And acknowledging good for other people is one of the basis of mankind. If you can't acknowledge good, if you can't say thank you, you have problems. And I think that the Jewish people were very astounded. Why our good works were not acknowledged? Why is it that we're being looked at as outsiders rather than as those who have helped build the country? And the Jewish people have always taken that position. Whatever country they've been in is to build the country, to participate in the country. And I think that we see that today, this week especially. We don't know what will be in the future with President-elect Trump. We are hopeful that this last week under President Obama is one where there are no further surprises, such as a surprise at the United Nations that took place. Last night I was really scouring the internet to really see what was going to be with the conference in Paris, and didn't really see any clear indication one way or another of if there was going to be a resolution, if that resolution was going to be brought to the United Nations to further push peace further away. But the notion of the beginning of the book of Exodus, as I mentioned this morning earlier, was Pharaoh the one that was the initiator and the instigator of problems for the Jews, or was it vice versa? Was he following the people that were around him? And we see a lot of this concern today by many of the defense organizations, the Anti-Defamation League, the American Jewish Congress, and others, how they're concerned with some of the rhetoric that has been bandied about during the election.
Yeah, they're concerned what Trump said, one way, very one way.
Correct.
They're Democrats.
Right, they're concerned. And we'll have to wait and be patient and really see really what's going to be with the future of the Jewish people. We hope it's good, but I think as the beginning of the book of Exodus makes clear, even though things look dire and dark for the Jewish people, in the end, the Exodus from Egypt took place. In the end, the Jewish people were going to go to the land of Israel, and they were going to establish it. So irrespective of what others may say in France or at other conferences, the Jewish people are not required, because the International says so, to give up their homeland or to harm their electorate. The electorate that that freely elected Benjamin Netanyahu and the government that's in
Which
Israel
Barack
right now.
Obama, of course, tried to influence that election while making up bogus claims about Putin in this country. By the way, I do want to point out one thing about Obama. I don't know if you caught this, but 24 minutes ago, I think we entered the last 100 hours of the Obama administration, which is kind of nice.
I wasn't aware of
I
that.
just figured that out myself, keeping in mind we're in Central Time Zone here.
Okay. Very
Yeah,
good.
it's a nice little milestone there.
Okay.
So how would you sum up the Obama presidency? I mean, obviously we had a lot of fears, and unless something really bad happens in the last 100 hours now, I think we've made it through okay, and Israel's made it through okay. But how would you sum up Obama, who's no friend of the Jews, or at least...
Well, I think President Obama disappointed people. I think that, you see Thomas Friedman and others in the New York Times and that felt, was he going to go down in history as the greatest friend of Israel or among the greatest friends of Israel? And I think that what happened with the United Nations resolution that wasn't vetoed by the United States of America greatly disappointed many people, many of his longtime supporters.
But that's the end. I mean, so much before that, too. Iran?
I think certainly the Iranian deal was one that was not good for Israel. And again, while America and John Kerry felt it was very good for Israel, I think, we have to believe Prime Minister Netanyahu that felt it was not good for Israel. But I think that the thing that concerns me the most is the partisanship that has been left. There never used to be any type of distinction between Democrats and Republicans. Israel was looked at as an ally, as our staunchest ally, as our only ally. And if you look at some of the polling numbers now, you do see that there is clearly a distinction between Democrats and Republicans in terms of support of Israel, and that's bad for the Jewish people. And I think that when one looks at President Obama's legacy towards the state of Israel, I think that departure from what was historically across the board support for the Jewish people has to be something that is of concern to all of us. And who knows what the future brings. The future eventually will bring good things to the Jewish people, because that's up to the Almighty. But it is something that we have to be concerned about. It's not something that's a short-term, one-time thing. The United Nations resolution is going to hamper the peace process. It's going to make peace more difficult. Abbas of the Palestinian Authority, who's now, I believe, in his 11th year of his 4-year term, said very clearly, the United Nations says that Jerusalem is ours and the West Bank is ours, and the Jewish people have no stake in it, and it doesn't belong to them. It's sheer and utter nonsense.
One thing I think that has developed, and it may be a question of time, not purely because of Obama, but you see the distinction between observant Jews and the way they vote, and the non-observant Jews and the way they vote. And some of it's just demographics. It would have just evolved that way with or without Obama. But overwhelmingly so, non-observant Jews still are Democrats. And I like to say, if you go into a synagogue on an average day of the week, the overwhelming majority of people who actually went to synagogue, meaning more observant Jews, voted for Trump. I mean, do you think there's some truth to that?
Oh, I think so. If you believe the polling, if you believe the analysis that's been done since the election, it would seem that that's exactly the case, even in New York, in Illinois, places that were pretty strongly Democratic. So I think there's some truth in that. I think in Israel, in terms of the popularity of President Obama and President-elect Trump, I think there's also, you see that disparity between the more observant than compared to the less observant. But that's also one of the biggest problems that I see, is that the Jewish people have to be united. We didn't get out of Egypt until we were united. That's actually part of Moses's charge as the Redeemer. He ran away from Egypt. He felt that there were informers among the Jews, and he ran away, and he went to Midian, not for some short time, but for a 60-year period, and he was going to stay there. And part of him speaking with the Almighty by the burning bush for 7 days was not just to get him to accept the mission of being the teacher of the Jewish people and to reacquaint them with the morality of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, but it was his reacceptance himself of loving his fellow Jew, of realizing that if they weren't as moral as he thought they should have been, it was because they were enslaved. It's tough to be moral when you're in a concentration camp, which is really what was going on in Egypt. It's very difficult to embrace morality and goodness to one another when you're concerned if you're going to be killed that day or not. And I think that was part of Moses' mission as well, the moving from God's being hidden to God's being revealed. And that was something that Moses had to accept himself to begin to love his fellow Jew once again. And we see at the end of his life how Moses, when the Jewish people sinned, he said, God, wipe me out from your book if you're not going to forgive this people. And I think that that's something that the Jewish people need to do. We need to live up to our mandate of being a light into the nations, of repairing the world and going in the way of the Almighty, but also certainly that begins with loving ourselves, loving our families, taking responsibility for ourselves, our families, the greater Jewish community, and then we'll be able to move on and fulfill the proper role that the Almighty has in store for all of us and for all mankind, which is an era of goodness and peace and harmony. And with all transitions from president to president, we hope that that's what this transition will lead to as well. Finally, an era of peace, finally an era of goodness, an era of equality, where all mankind will be blessed equally by the Almighty. That's our strong wish and our strong hope and desire.
Any thoughts on the fact that for the first time, I guess it might have been the case if Dukakis had won, but we will have a president with Jewish grandchildren, in fact, a Jewish daughter by conversion, and I think one of his sons married a Jewish woman too.
Well, I think that that's certainly something that many people are crowing about and are very ecstatic about. I think that there's no doubt about the fact that his daughter does have influence on him, and his son-in-law certainly has influence on him. Again, I look at that as a double-edged sword. On the one hand, when people are not going to like his policies, and it's invariable that people will not like the policies of a president, they'll blame the Jews. There's that danger. Which is something we have to be mindful of and be careful of. On the other hand, when you look at the end of the book of Genesis and all that Joseph did for Pharaoh, and Pharaoh was enamored with Joseph, he couldn't believe that up until that point, people used food as a weapon. I mean, when he used to surround a city to lay siege to it, they cut off the food, they cut off the water. Food was always used as a weapon. And when there was a famine, Joseph said to Pharaoh, there's a better way. We don't have to use food as a weapon. We can not only serve our own people, but we could serve the whole area, the whole region. And that was one of the great things that Joseph did that Pharaoh embraced. And he was looking forward to Jacob coming with the brothers, saying, if this is Joseph, if this is one person, imagine what his father taught him. Imagine what his brothers can do to build Egypt. And I think that we would hope that given this opportunity, even though there was adversity, a famine where all of Egypt was destroyed, where all of Egypt sold themselves and their property because there was absolutely no food, but yet Joseph gave back to them. He instituted an equitable tax, a fair tax, no different than what Mordechai did in the book of Esther in the time of Purim. So you see that Jewish advisors to the king have always been more moral, decent, have tried to improve the state of all mankind and peace for everybody, because you can't have peace for one group. You have to have peace for all groups. And I think that as servants of the Almighty, the Jewish people have that special obligation. And hopefully during the incoming administration, the Jewish people will be able to show that morality, that decency, that goodness that will, rather than estranging other groups, or rather than encouraging anti-Semitism, quite the opposite will take place, that the Jewish people will be loved and appreciated and will live up to following all of the commandments which is the straightest way and the most simplest way to achieve goodness. And hopefully, as a result, the incoming administration will be one that is crowned with success, with victory. And what I mean by that is not of one group over another, but victory for all humanity. That the era of peace and goodness is finally going to be heralded in for all mankind.
Any final thoughts, whether hopes for a Trump presidency or anything else on your mind as we wrap up here?
No, I just think that, probably one of the first things that we saw from the current conference in Paris was the threats that if the embassy is moved to Jerusalem, it'll unleash the fires of hell, I believe was President Abbas's statement. And, if President-elect Trump actually does do that, we'll be hopeful that there will only be peace as a result of it. That instead of giving in to intimidation and to threats, if we stand strongly and firmly with the goal of peace in mind, a fair peace, a just peace for all sides, then hopefully that peace will finally come. So hopefully, if the embassy is moved, there will be no problems, only goodness and peace.
I forgot to ask you one thing. It is Martin Luther King Day today, and John Lewis has been in the news. He was one of the people who boycotted Netanyahu, and I thought to myself, that's quite a contrast from Martin Luther King's view on Israel, and I thought that's just something that would be worth going over with people. I know it's an afterthought to the main point of this.
I don't know. It was on my mind. I just it
I forgot to
something
ask.
that you had asked me, and I
forgot
wanted to be
what day it was.
focused on what you were asking me.
Yeah, no, I forgot.
Certainly, my Rebbe to go in all of the light of our generation, Rabbi Aaron Soloveitchik of blessed memory, was a big supporter of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. He felt, unlike some of the other race baiters who I will not name today, who are Chicagoans,
Yeah.
unfortunately, Dr. King saw things much differently, and there are many different programs today across the Jewish community celebrating his life, celebrating his ideals, people doing good works across this city and across this nation in memory of this great, wonderful individual who truly was God-fearing, who truly believed in peace and goodness and equality. And we hope that the dream of Dr. King, as he expressed in the White House and as he expressed in Washington in the mall, comes to fruition, where all of God's children can be together in peace and in harmony and in goodness and in equality, so that the world that the Almighty wanted for all of us will finally be able to come to fulfillment.
All right, Rabbi Louis Lazovsky, Skokie, Illinois. Thanks for happy Martin Luther King Day, happy Inauguration Week, and thanks for your time today.
Thank
Good
you.
to see you again.
Good to see you again, too. Thank you so much. God bless. Bye-bye.